So, welcome to Treatment Talk Tuesday, where we explore cutting edge perspectives on autism and neurodiversity. Today, we are thrilled to introduce Dr. Ian Hale, a world renowned educator, speaker, and autism specialist who shares his expertise from a unique perspective as an individual with both autism and Asperger's. With over 30 years of experience in special education and university teaching, Dr. Hale brings a deep insider understanding of how the system operates compared to how it ideally should. His influence extends beyond the classroom to writing articles, poetry, and hosting podcasts, while also being recognized for his contributions to medical science and specialist photography. Today, Dr. Hale will share his insights on adult neurodiversity, the challenges and implications. His unique perspective, grounded in personal and professional experience, offers valuable insights into the complexities and realities of adult neurodiversity. Join us for an enlightening discussion with Dr. Ian Hale and discover his profound understanding of the challenges and opportunities faced by neurodivergent adults. Thank you so much, Dr. Ian, for joining us today and further handing over it to you.
That's absolutely my pleasure to do so, and I would like to greet everyone around the world who is watching this live and who will in the future when it's posted online. Yeah, there are a few things that I would like to cover. There is still, and I don't know why, the public perception and indeed the societal perception, and that includes the services, doctors, social services, educators, etc., that somehow neurodiversity in general and autism in particular are phases of growing up, and that suddenly, mysteriously, at around the age of 18, they disappear. Because that, if you look around the world where there is provision for special education for special needs people of all types, and that can include people who are deaf, who are blind, and everything else. But with neurodiversity, all that support stops at the age of either 16 or 18, which is ridiculous. The source of neurodiversity is genetic. We inherit it, not necessarily from our parents or our grandparents. There are such things as called jumping genes, to give one example, and they can skip anything up to 17 generations. But the fact is that neurodiversity is inherited from whomever and how far back, we don't always know. As a result of the genetic differences between the coding you would expect for a normal individual and that of a neurodiverse one, extends far beyond the purely neurological, the brain. And people, again, think of neurodiversity, the word, neuro is, obviously about brain, that it affects only the brain, let's say, a learning difficulty, dyslexia, is a common example. But we have to remember that what affects one part of our genetic makeup, our entire code, the genome, affects everything else. So we will always find people with neurodiversities who have what are called comorbidities. Wherever you find neurodiversity, of whatever form, and I'll come on to that, you will always find other physiological symptoms. The most common of these are gut problems. And that is why so many children who are neurodiverse are labeled as picky eaters. They have a sense of what they can and cannot safely eat. Okay, or drink, as the case may be. And provision has to be made for that, and made for life. which is the point I'm getting at here. This is, as the introduction said, really more about what happens when any support disappears at 18, any state support, that is to say, or charitable often support as well will disappear at 18. You will almost always find that at least one of the 5 senses is hyperdeveloped as well as another comorbidity. Now, in my case, it is hearing. I can hear very, very high-pitched sounds that other people can't hear. And of course, when I was young, I was accused of making it up. I was accused of imagining things, you know, and all that kind of nasty stuff, you know, made to feel a freak. Yeah, that would be the right word. Or neurotic. I got my first job at the age of 16 working in an engineering office. And because it was part of a factory complex, any new employee had to undergo a physical, and that included a hearing check. And they found at that stage that no, I hadn't been making it up. I really could hear well beyond what the normal person could at the higher ranges. So there you go. Don't ever make assumptions. If you want to know how neurodiversity feels, ask a neurodiverse person. Okay? Of any age. Hearing is the most common, but taste and smell. I've come across plenty of neurodiverse individuals who have a very heightened taste of sense and smell, and some have a very heightened tactile sense of touch. They don't like to be touched. What would seem to a normal person, a common pressure handshake would be painful to somebody with a very highly developed sensitivity to touch. You got to respect that, people, you really do. And again, that doesn't stop at 18. Right, the second main point I want to make is that autism and Asperger's are not separate spectra in themselves, although they can certainly be viewed in that way perfectly accurately. But when I speak of neurodiversity, I go beyond that. I talk about bipolar disorder. I talk about schizophrenia, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And everything that I've just said applies equally to those. And it is perfectly possible to have more than one neurodiverse condition within the same person. A person can be, for example, autistic and bipolar. It happens in the same way as because maybe someone's got a broken ankle, and that doesn't mean that they can't get a broken finger later on or before it's healed. You can have more than one condition at the same time. And it doesn't matter whether it's a bone or a brain, same thing. They are all part of the same genetic code, which determines to a very large extent who, as individuals, we are. And the big message that I want to get over today, and that I've said many times, and that I make very, very clear with examples, with references, in my newly released book, the link to which will be added to this podcast. It is in English. It will soon be translated into Turkish. It's written not in the language of an academic, not in the language of a doctor or a psychologist. It's written in the language of someone who knows both of those languages and is interpreting them for pretty much anyone to be able to read, patients, carers, people themselves with neurodiversities. And it is a guidebook of what things mean and a lot of examples of what can be done to improve the prospects and indeed the general happiness of the individual. I'm going to touch on a couple of those. It is true to say, in my experience, which, as the lady said, it extends more than 30 years now in special education, that every parent and every sibling's 24-hour, 7-day-a-week nightmare for their neurodiverse loved one is, what is going to happen to this person whom I love when I am no longer able to care for them, speak for them, interpret the world for them, or look after them myself? Okay, that is something that haunts every family affected by neurodiversity. What is going to happen to my loved one when I'm no longer available to look after them? And that is a question that the book answers, and how to get around that problem to a great extent. Okay? The problem won't solve itself. It requires a very long number of years of planning, of finding the right experts, of accessing the right services, and details of how to do that are all in my book. And there's a lot of DIY stuff as well. For example, I talked earlier about the problem with noise, which meant that my sleep patterns as a kid were a nightmare because of noise, which hampered my schooling greatly and really led to a great deal of unhappiness. I'm fully aware that not many families around the world these days are able to buy the kind of special equipment and technologies which can solve these problems. For example, noise cancelling headphones for when someone with neurodiversity is walking around, Pink or white noise generators will drown out pretty much any other sound, and if they're carefully tuned, they're very helpful for helping a person sleep without any other aid at all. I mean, pink noise is very calming and encourages sleep, while at the same time cancelling out other disturbing frequencies. But of course, these things are expensive and not everyone could afford them. My parents couldn't. I come from a very poor background initially. So in the book, I've described very carefully methods of noise cancellation, what can be done. And the same applies to light. I mean, a lot of people with neurodiversity are very sensitive to bright light. That's one that's fairly easily solved. What is much less easy to solve are social interaction problems. I mean, all neurodiversities characterized, and here you can put them into one big spectrum with difficulty in communicating thoughts, feelings, with self-expression, if you will. I mean, often we find dyslexia involved. I mentioned it before. And dyslexia itself is not a neurodiversity. It's actually normally a problem with the actual nerve structures within the eye, or other or nerve structures and pathways in the muscles of the hands or arms. But we do find obviously people with neurodiversities who are also, dyslexic, dyscalculic, which is the number equivalent, people who are number blind. And we also get a lot of people, and particularly on the autism spectrum, which is what we are focusing more so on with Autism Connect, who are non-verbal for life, who are unable to talk. And the reasons why they're unable to talk, can be very, very many, and a lot is still not understood by medical science. We still have an awful long way to go to understand the brain, and indeed to understand our own coding, our own genomic structure. So, we must never fall into the trap of making assumptions about people. Something that I recommend is finding other forms of communication, of ways for the neurodiverse person to experience what they feel. They may be in pain, but they can't say, my arm hurts, or, whatever. They might be in a lot of pain and they might really react. They might, run around, they might be screaming, they might be, whatever. But unable to express why that is happening. The same thing can happen with sensory overload. Too much noise, too much light, too many people, too much touch, too much of the wrong kind of touch. When you think about it, a school environment with its ringing bells and everything else is just about the worst place that you could put a neurodiverse person, which is why we have special education. In Britain, we have quiet rooms set aside that are lit very differently, where we're looking essentially to create a low sensory environment. And when the person can, de-stress, can let it out, essentially. And if they want to go in the room and scream for half an hour, it's fine. It's not disturbing anybody else. And, they will calm down over a period. And of course, there are medical treatments available as well, which I go into, both the pluses and the minuses, and what I recommend from my experience as a medical scientist, and what I strongly warn against. One of the big problems that we find in medicine, and also, as a medical scientist, speaking with doctors, speaking particularly with teachers, and the references are available. The statistics are, beyond question, and anybody can Google it, and you have to take my word for all this. There is a very, very large difference between the IQ, the intelligence level of specialist medical scientists compared, for example, with teachers, as a profession. And that makes communication between, really the two ends of the two ends of the line with, when you're looking at neurodiversity, that makes communication, between the research and the science at one end, and the face-to-face experience of educators. And indeed, that applies equally, to potential employers at the other. that's a big problem, and trying to fill in at least some of that gap was one of the primary reasons why I wrote my book, and books actually, and articles, as the lady mentioned at the beginning, and why I do broadcasts in order to you know promote the best interests, for families, for educators, and of course primarily for the individual who is neurodiverse themselves. That's my motivation. And obviously the more people who can buy and share the book, the better, because the more good it does. I mean, I've had letters from across the world already, and it's only been out, 6 months, I think, about that, and promoted for, far less time, from people who have from far away from the UK as Australia, and you don't get much further away, saying how much it's changed their lives for the better, and how much now they understand, and these are, pretty standard families, they're not doctors, they're not astronauts, they're not, whoever, just, people like ourselves. And obviously that's an immensely satisfying thing to do, and that is why I do promote the book, because I've seen what positive results it's had for people already. I mean, I certainly don't characterize myself in any sense as an autism or a neurodiverse activist. What I am is an advocate and a communicator, which is why I'm doing this, which is why I write as well. As was mentioned in the introduction, I also write poetry. I find that a very good way of expressing my own emotions. And the same applies with photography. I have absolutely no, despite many efforts over the years, it turns out that I have absolutely no talent for creating physical art. I can't draw very well. I can't paint very well. But I'm fascinated by the idea of images, and I found that I am, a world-class photographer, with a number of awards, and capturing people, capturing moments, capturing things that catch my eye, really, as well as planned photo shoots. That's another way in which I can express myself as a neurodiverse person. People think and say, well, how come you've got this like medical science stuff going on, and and you write poetry and that. Yeah, it's about expression, it's not, they're not in contradiction of each other, It's just that is, those are two outlets I've found to express, my own emotions and my own observations and experiences, as a neurodiverse person. And I'm sure that it's one of the reasons I believe in art therapy, for example, which I mentioned. Someone has just asked me a question. It's the unique challenges for neurodivergent adults, including, and especially people with autism. Well, I've finding a job. I mean, how do you do an interview if you're nonverbal? Relationships. How do you have a relationship with someone if you can't speak, or if you don't like to be touched? That's going to be a problem. But there are ways around it. There are ways to improve. There are ways to grow. And a lot of it is about a lot more understanding by the general public. I mean, I guarantee that no one can leave their house today and walk more than 200 meters without knowingly or unknowingly meeting someone who's neurodiverse. So this book doesn't only apply to families, doesn't only apply to educators to doctors to all the rest of it. It applies to every single member of society, you know? And we must bear in mind that the modern world, to a very, very large extent, above the 95th percentile, was in fact created by neurodiverse people. Einstein, Nikola Tesla, Elon Musk, Mozart, Sir Isaac Newton, all neurodiverse. And I have given a slew more of examples in the book. Neurodiverse, people ought to be appreciating neurodiversity. I mean, so many of us seem content with the idea of asking for acceptance, which seems to me like saying, yeah, okay, you're different, but yeah, okay, we'll accept you've got a right to exist. No way, you know. Once we want and deserve as human beings, you know, something a lot better than that. Also, we should be, you know, we should be appreciated for our own talents as individual. Another question, would I recommend special education as essential to parents of neurodiverse kids? Unless you are very confident in your ability to homeschool, and also confident, at least in the special education environment, my answer to that question is definitely yes, because they do have understanding of, you know, the kind of sensory issues I spoke about earlier. So yeah, thank you. You know, these questions are appreciated. You know, because I'm pretty much done talking. So, you know, if there are any questions now, you know, please add them. And I'm going to be staying on for another few minutes, and you know, I'll answer them in the chat box, or speak to Hale later about it, and you know, we'll do something about that. But yeah, I do regard well qualified special education starting as early as possible, and I can't stress too highly the importance of getting a very early diagnosis. Difficult though I realize that is. I mean, in Britain, for example, there's a 5-year waiting list to get even diagnosed. You know, and that's even if you can, you know. And that also is an issue that I've discussed in the book. You know, it's a guide. It's not a great big thick volume. It's a series of maps, if you will, and with the routes explained. I mean, I was very lucky. My mother was a very, very, very senior figure in nursing, and she realized that I was different from other children. I think just before, somewhere around the age of, I think just before I was 2, she told me. You know, and you know, my parents were amazing, and my grandfather as well. You know, my grandmother. You know, they understood at some level that and levels, you know, that you know this one's going to be a little bit different. But you know, very few people would be lucky to have the kind of lucky enough to have the kind of parents and you know and family support that I did. And it would be quite wrong of me not to pay you know tribute to that you know in this opportunity. Right, I think if everybody's done, that's about it. And again, thank you for listening, thank you for watching, and thank you for allowing me this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Dr. Yan. Currently, we do not have any further questions, so I would like to conclude this session. So, I hope everyone found exploration of autism and neurodiversity with you. And thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your personal insights with us. And thank you to everyone who joined us today in this important conversation. Until our next Treatment Talk Tuesday, may we continue to embrace diverse perspectives and advocate for acceptance and understanding. Take care and see you next time. Once again, a big thank you to Dr. Yan for joining us today, and I hope we collaborate again in the future as well.
As do I. Thank you. Cheers.
Yeah. Bye.